Hey, welcome back to my review of the Google UX course. This is gonna be part 2 of 7. But before we begin, let me ask one of the most common questions that I got after the first video. Is this course gonna be enough for me to land my first job as a UX designer right after I finish it? So my answer here is unlikely. Of course, this is gonna give you a solid foundation and it's gonna give you some experience, but it's not gonna be enough to actually get your first job right away, unless you're like very lucky. So if you finish the course, get the certificate, get the knowledge, it will be enough to help you understand UX better and have a solid foundation on which you can build on your own. So that's gonna mean a lot of reading, a lot of extra research of your own, and a lot of portfolio projects that you're gonna make. Because if you're only gonna use the 2 or 3 portfolio projects that you'll have after this course is done, then in the eyes of most employers, you're gonna look like you're lazy. So yeah, a solid foundation, but the dedication and hard work is what's gonna get you the first job. And I am making a video on how to stand out from the crowd because, as you probably know, over 40,000 people are taking this course right now. So that's gonna mean that very soon there's gonna be 40,000 potential UX designers, junior UX designers for employers to choose from. So standing out from that crowd is gonna be key. And I'm gonna tell you a couple of tricks that you can use, but that's gonna be another video. The second part of the course is all about user research. So it's gonna be all about personas, customer journeys, empathy maps, and more. You'll also learn a couple of ways to define the user's problems and come up with a solution. So far sounds pretty good, right? And this time there are assignments that you have to finish and they're peer graded, so you have to upload them and wait for somebody to review them. And by actually doing the personas, user stories, user journey maps and all that, you're gonna have a very good base for your portfolio. Because this is what most case studies and portfolios have, so it's gonna be a very nice way for you to actually start building your portfolio with some real things. And many employers actually reading case studies, they expect to see things that are gonna be in this part of the course. Also, all that knowledge is gonna be pretty useful if you're gonna be doing some personal projects and sometimes you don't have the ability to do any research on them, but you'll be able to actually create those personas and those user journeys on your own and have a much more thorough case study. So the course starts with picking an app idea from a randomly generated list. It's basically 2 sentences that kind of complement each other, so you kind of randomize them, but it's usually going to be an app that does something for some specific scenario or some specific place or business type. And they say there's thousands of choices. I just clicked randomized once and I got a timesheet app for a food truck in New York City, so I decided that I'm going to go with this. And the good thing is that once again, Google is making a clear separation between UX designers and UX researchers. And this is gonna be research for designers, so it's not gonna be like a super thorough, super complex research part. It's gonna be more aimed at understanding research enough so you can conduct it if you're working at a small company, or that you can talk to a UX researcher at your company without really using like a dictionary or something. So it's gonna help you communicate, but it's also gonna help you do some basic research yourself. And one thing that I noticed this time is that when Google is using their own specific naming conventions, this time they provide options of how this thing is called in other places. And that's really great because it makes it a lot easier for you to actually search for it. The questions during the videos are also a lot better this time because they're more difficult, and that's good because I think that this requires a lot more critical thinking and logical thinking than just kind of selecting what you remembered from a few seconds ago. They also talk about the sunk cost bias, which is something that happens so often that it's really important that you know about it. It's when you're designing something for so long that you feel so invested in it that you're overlooking the bad decisions and the bad directions that it's taking. So you're so invested that you're willing to kind of ignore some of that bad stuff because that would mean that you'd have to redesign it or redo it, and you don't really want to do it because you spent so much time. But in reality, if you continue doing that, you're basically going on a path of self-destruction because in the end the project is gonna be killed off anyway, and you're gonna be wasting even more time. So it's really good to understand this problem and to be able to actually remove the bad design at any point, so don't get too attached to it. And I also noticed another cute thing about Coursera. So for privacy purposes, I use Safari, I never use Chrome, and there's this thing that keeps happening during the videos every now and then. The website says that it's using too much memory, and then it kind of reloads itself and the video starts from the beginning. Reloads itself and the video starts from the beginning. Those videos are 720p and this thing never happens on YouTube when I'm watching 4K videos, so it's definitely something with bad optimization or just bad design overall. So the main problem I have with this part of the course is the peer review. Because it sounds really well on paper, right? You're gonna review somebody else's work, so that way you're gonna learn how you can improve yours, and they're gonna review your work, so everybody wins and Google doesn't have to do a thing. But imagine one of these two hypothetical scenarios. The first one is that while you're grading somebody else's work, you have no idea if they are not looking at your work at the same time. So how would you grade them? Well, I would give them 100% every time, because I would be afraid that if I give them less, they're gonna grade my work lower, and yeah. So there's not much learning here going on when everybody gets pretty much the same score, and I guess most people are gonna be that way. Because chances are that even if your work is not perfect, you're gonna get 100% anyway. And there's also this other scenario, because we're all learning here. So we have no idea if the person that's gonna be reviewing our work has a good grasp on this and if they even understand what they should be reviewing. So they can give you a lower score even if your assignment was perfect, and that's gonna be pretty unfair. So in both cases, it's either useless or a disaster. And since Google is trying to use this course to train their future employees, I believe that they should actually assign some people to grade those courses. And I know that there's a lot of work, a lot of extra work, but it would be a lot better if somebody with experience was actually grading them. Just my 2 cents. I know it's kind of fun to create personas and user stories and everything else, but the reality is that in most projects and in most cases, you're not gonna be doing personas at some point. So this is really good to understand how it works and how the thought process works. But after a few years in the industry, you're gonna be mentally skipping that step and kind of creating those personas in your head without the backstory, but mostly as user groups. This is an exercise that's good for juniors, but you need to be aware that in real world, you rarely ever make personas. And in my over 500 projects that I've done since '98, I think that we only did personas twice or maybe 3 times because the projects were so niche and so targeted towards a very specific audience that we had to do it. But in many cases, there's something that I'm probably gonna record a video on. You design for the nerd and the noob, which basically means you design for somebody who has good control and good tech understanding, so they know how to use apps and websites, and then for the noob, which is somebody who doesn't have that understanding. And of course, this is pretty oversimplified, and I'll try to cover this in more detail in another video. Another funny thing that I found with the course is that they show you how accessibility works with input methods, which basically means that you should be able to navigate a form with just your keyboard, so you don't have to use the mouse. And this is great, and this is how forms should be designed always. But the problem here is that on Safari, you can't really use that form that way. So they show you that, okay, look at this, this is gonna be good practice, and just use tab to go between the fields. And it kind of works until you get to the checkbox, because you can never select that checkbox with the tab key, because normally you could go to the checkbox with the tab key, then press space to select it, then press tab to go to the button and enter to submit. But it doesn't work that way in this case. In this case, the form allows you to use tab to switch between the form fields, but you cannot select the checkbox without using your mouse. And if you try to use your mouse, it will allow you to click on that checkbox, but if you try to use it for anything else, it's just gonna show a ton of error messages. And also, this is pretty bad UX, because the form should be seamless, so you should be able to also transition between the mouse and the keyboard, especially if the keyboard just doesn't work. So yeah, their intentions were pure, but this is not how you design a good form. Okay, and here's one more little thing, and I know this is being picky and it doesn't really affect the quality of the knowledge there, but I am picky, and I think that in design we should be really paying attention to the smallest of details, because subconsciously our users or our customers are gonna notice that, and they're gonna feel like something is not quite right, not quite polished. So there is this monitor behind the teacher there, and sometimes they show some stuff on it, but in some cases they just do a crude overlay of text that's not in perspective, and it really shows. You can see it here. the text is kind of placed front and center while the monitor is at a little bit of an angle. And I think that this should really be done better. It's just a little bit lazy, and also our brain really likes perspective and likes to be able to predict where things should be. So if something is out of place like this, our mind is subconsciously treating it as a little bit worse. And it works the same with everything. So alignment and good typography and good hierarchy, these are all things that influence the decisions of your users and of your customers. So even if everything is kind of right, but it's a little bit off, their brains are gonna see that even if they don't see it. And it's gonna lower their perception of how good it is. Just like this little text on the monitor did for me. So yeah, little things matter. And I don't really want to do any spoilers here, so I'm not gonna talk about the precise things that they're teaching. I believe that the scope of this second part is really good, and it's gonna be really useful to understand research and do some basic research on your own as a designer. But as usual, you should always try to look at other sources and improve, because just using that knowledge is not gonna be enough. As I said before, the quizzes here are a little bit more challenging, and that's really good because the quizzes in the first part were so easy that you could actually finish them in like 2 minutes. And right now you sometimes really have to think, and some of the questions are quite tricky. And this is good because design can be tricky. I'm not a fan of the peer grading because I think that it's pretty useless. And the only good thing about it is that you can maybe see what other people did, but you could have done this with like a public version of those assignments anyway, because they're gonna be pretty similar to each other. And it's also great that this time Google is providing alternative names for some things. So you're gonna be able to search for them with their proper names or their more popular names, and not just the way that Google is doing it. There is some stuff here that juniors have to make, but at some point you're gonna stop doing it, like personas. But there's also one thing that is really important, and they actually covered this in great detail. And this is competitive analysis. Because if you're working on a product, chances are that somebody else has made a similar thing before, because nothing is really original anymore, right? Competitive analysis allows you to analyze what everybody else has done, to compile a report on what can be done better in your own product. And this is something that as designers at Hype4, we actually do it every single time. So if you were to take just one exercise as the most important part of the course, I believe realistically for like what the market wants, or like smaller companies want and startups, I think this is gonna be it. So pay special attention to competitive analysis. And there's one more reason, especially at this stage, why you should pay special attention to it. Because if you're building your own portfolio and you're creating some simple apps and websites and designs, chances are you're not gonna have a lot to write in the case study, because you probably didn't do any research, because how can you do research on a product that doesn't exist? You would need to source your users and do some surveys or some tests or whatever, and it's not easy. You could do some Twitter surveys and that's a good start, but the good thing is that if you do a competitive analysis of your portfolio project, you can actually analyze some real products and add it to the case study, and it's gonna make it look more full and more robust. So it's a great way to overcome the problem of many junior designers that don't really have a lot to talk about in their case studies. So do I recommend this course? Definitely yes. It's not perfect, but nothing is really perfect, but it's good enough for you to get the foundation to understand research, to either pursue the research career and learn more about that, or have enough knowledge to communicate with researchers well and understand your design decisions and maybe improve your design process a little bit as well. So I totally recommend it, but you need to be aware that it's not gonna be enough. Because if you want to stand out and if you want to truly understand research, you need to start doing it, not only reading about it and doing some simple exercises to get a certificate. So you need to really put in a lot of work, especially now when there's gonna be like 40,000 people with a similar skill set coming onto the job market very soon. Thanks for getting this far, and leave a comment or a like if you liked this video, and subscribe if you haven't, and I'm gonna catch you guys in the next one. Cheers!